Thank you for joining us online here at Fam Church as we continue our series, Winning Team. Now, if you haven't already, please click the subscribe button below to subscribe to our YouTube channel and go out to Facebook at facebook.com/famchurch. And now, our lead pastor, Brian Lane.
We're continuing our series called The Winning Team. You may have walked in and saw goalposts and say, what goes on in here? During the week, do they play football on the stage? No, the goalposts are there for our new message series that we've been on called The Winning Team. And we're going to talk about, we've been talking about, it started last week, but we're talking about what it takes to make our team a winning team, because everyone wants to win, right? Yes? Is there anybody in here says, no, I prefer to lose? No, I don't think there is. And we feel with this series that if we apply these principles that we are talking about to our life, we will win personally, and Fam Church is going to win as well. And so now, as I mentioned last week, there are many parts and pieces that go into making a team, okay? You have to have a coach who knows what he's doing, who understands the positions and the different roles. You have to have an offense. You have to have a defense. You have to have players that can execute a game plan. You have to have a quarterback that can read a defense. You have to have a quarterback that understands game management, that knows when he can throw a pass and when he can't throw a pass. And all of those things make up part of being a winning team. But those are not the kind of things that we're going to look at, that we've been looking at in this series. We are looking at something from a little different slant. We're looking at things that are even more foundational, that need to be at the core of who we are in order to win. And so last week we talked about how preparation and discipline were needed to be able to win. We saw that preparation and discipline are essential to life and being able to win in life in general. Because, I mean, think about it. If you have a job and you've got to get up in the morning, you've got to set an alarm clock, and you have to be disciplined in your life that when that alarm clock goes off, you shut it off and get out of bed and get ready and go to work. Because if you're not disciplined enough to do that, you're not going to have a job for very long. And what I love it when Robbie amens when we talk about work. I love it. So, and what we saw last week is, so like not being able to get to our job can disqualify us from working. There's something that can disqualify us from winning in the kingdom of God as well. And last week we looked at a section of scripture in 1 Corinthians where we saw that the main thing, the primary component that can derail us and cause us not to win in our life and our walk with Jesus is sin. And sin is anything that we do that God doesn't want us to do. Anything that falls in that category is sin. And so a lot of us have sins in our life. A lot of us, I think all of us, do things that God doesn't want us to do from time to time and occasion. And the deal is that we have to know ourselves and know the sin that we are tempted to fall into, okay? We have to prepare by knowing the sin that we will fall to. And then not only do we have to prepare by knowing the sin, we have to be disciplined enough to come up with a plan in our life to come against that when that sin comes into our life. And so we need to prepare by getting a game plan ready, and then we need to be disciplined enough to execute that game plan when sin comes into our life. And as we can do that, we will start to see the battles with sin slowly won more and more in our life as we prepare and as we execute that game plan. And as we win more and more of the battles in life, guess what? It comes into our church, and our church begins to win more and more of the battles in life. And then we end up winning the race. We end up standing in the winner's circle at the end. And that's what we looked at last week. So this week we're going to talk about a second piece to winning, and it's endurance. Have you guys ever had to endure anything? Maybe you went to a movie and that movie was terrible, but you paid your $10 and so you weren't going to get up and leave the movie, so you sat there and endured the movie. Maybe you were on a sports team that had to endure a tough schedule. Okay, a few years ago, I played on a basketball team. It was like 4 years ago, right? 4 years ago, I played on a basketball team, okay? I was the tallest guy on the team. Okay, I'm 6'1". Well, if you put that in basketball terms, that equals not very tall. So they put me as the tallest guy as the center, okay? I was the center. I was guarding guys that were 6'6", 6'8", 6'10", and weighed 100 pounds more than me, okay? This was a struggle for endurance because every week I'd be taking charges from guys that weighed 100 pounds more than me. Do you know what it's like to get trucked from a guy who's 6'10" and weighs about 280 pounds and you weigh 170? It's not fun. Somehow I ended up being the leading scorer on our team. I still don't understand how that happens, but our team went 2-16 that year. Okay, I had to endure a long basketball season. I told them I'm not going to play next year if you don't get somebody taller. Okay, you need somebody who can play center besides me. But that was in Connecticut, and we left there not too long after that. Okay, or possibly you've had to endure a long car or bus ride. I had the bus ride from hell a couple of years ago. I took a team to National Fine Arts in Columbus, Ohio. We broke down 3 times on the highway, including one day in the afternoon in Columbia, South Carolina, when it was 99 degrees outside. Okay? Some of you are saying, well, just getting on a bus with kids would be enough to endure for me. Well, we broke down and broke down and broke down and broke down. Some of us have had to endure bad jobs or bad bosses. Maybe we endured a vehicle that never ran right and was always in the shop. I had a Ford that was like that. This thing spent as much time in the shop as it did on the road, and because of that, I won't purchase a Ford product ever again. But, there's some applause for not liking Ford products. How about that? But others, you've endured horrible relationships, and the relationship was so bad that you never want to get into a relationship again. We've all had situations and circumstances we've endured. So what is endurance? Endurance is to suffer patiently. Some of you were saying, well, I was with you until you put the word patiently in there. But what does this have to do with winning? Well, see, it has everything to do with winning because in life, we are never handed anything. See, even the best sports teams in the land have to endure things in their schedule. I mean, Ohio State, this football season is a perfect example because everybody's playing Ohio State and coming with their A game. And what's happening? Ohio State is playing some close games. They're watching, they're seeing these teams like Northern Illinois yesterday, and people are like, oh, Ohio State should win by like 900 points, And they only win by 7, and it's like, what's going on? What's going on is teams are coming with their A game, and they're having to endure some tough tests. Some fail the test, like Alabama, which I'm very happy about. If you're an Alabama fan, I'm sorry. The Seattle Seahawks, they've had to do the same thing. They've been considered the best football team the last couple of years, and everybody brings their A game against them. And so they have to endure. They have to outlast their opponents. And this morning we're going to see that for us to win the race, for us to claim the prize, we are in the same situation as any sports team out there. And this morning we are going to look at the letter to the Hebrews, which is in the New Testament, and we're going to look at chapter 12 for the next piece in putting together a winning team in our life. So if you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Hebrews chapter 12. If you don't have a Bible, you don't know where it is, not a problem. We are going to put that on the screen behind me for you to follow along with. Now, before I read this section, I want to give you a little bit of information about this letter. And the first thing that we all need to know about this letter to the Hebrews is we have no idea who wrote this book, okay? I know if you have a King James Bible, it says the epistle from Paul to the Hebrews, but scholars, men and women who study this thing and look at these letters, they've concluded that they don't think Paul wrote this letter. And how they've concluded that is that they've compared stuff that they have that Paul wrote to this letter, and it's a lot different. Different words are used in this letter than Paul uses. Different grammar, Greek grammar is used in this letter than Paul uses. And the person who wrote Hebrews quotes the Old Testament in a different way than Paul did. And so putting all of these factors together, plus when Paul wrote anything, he usually signed his name to it. And in this case, there's no name signed to it. And so most people believe that Paul, in fact, did not write this letter. And we just don't have any idea who wrote it at all. But we do know one thing. The person who wrote the letter knew the group of people that he was writing to, because at the end he talks about wanting to come and visit them. So you may say, well, how did it get the name Hebrews? Where does this come from? Is it because they liked coffee and so Hebrews? I don't know. No, the reason it has the name Hebrews is because the writer and reader were very familiar with the Old Testament, especially the Jewish law and customs. So the assumption is made that this letter was written to people who were Jewish or at least Hebrew of some sort. And there are many topics this letter tackles. The biggest problem seems to be that the readers have stopped growing in their faith, okay? They've stopped growing in their faith because of the persecutions that they were facing, and because of those persecutions, they've stopped serving each other. They've also stopped going to church, and they've been in danger of lapsing back into Judaism or walking away from Christ altogether. And that was the primary concern of the writer who wrote this. He was concerned that these people were going to relapse, that they were going to step back, they were going to step out of Christianity because everything that was going on in their life. And so he was making them a challenge. He was putting a challenge before them, saying, despite the circumstances that you're facing, despite the situation that you're in, despite what's going on in your life, return to Christ and continue to follow him. And this is where the section that we are going to read comes in. And so let's read what it says in Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 3. It says this: therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So this section starts off with the word therefore. And when someone uses that word, they are trying to point to something. They're trying to draw a conclusion about something. And he is drawing a conclusion from what he had talked about previously in the letter, the stuff that we had just reviewed. But he's also more specifically trying to point back to Hebrews chapter 11. And so the question I hope you are asking is, what happens in Hebrews chapter 11 that he needs to point back to? Well, in Hebrews chapter 11, he goes through this whole list of things that people have accomplished by faith. He goes through and he talks about by faith, people were sawn in two. By faith, people were killed by the sword. By faith, people were thrown in jail, put in chains. By faith, they were stoned. And I always feel like I've got to explain this to this generation, because when you tell somebody they were stoned, they automatically think they're smoking some weed or something. They're just sitting there going, dude, Jesus is awesome. No, that's not what was going on here, okay? No one was smoking any weed. They literally picked up stones and killed people with them. And if you want to see a picture of this, turn to Acts chapter 7. There's a story of the stoning of Stephen, but that's what it looked like. That's how it went down. But people went around in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. They were living in caves and mountains and holes in the ground, all because of faith. And since so many were able to endure what this life threw at them, the writer is saying, you can too. Because what they were going through was not that unusual. What they were going through was not that strange. What they were going through was the standard stuff that most believers go through. But if they wanted to win, they needed to endure. And I think that's the first thing that these verses are telling us about enduring. See, life throws a lot of junk at us. Things come out of nowhere and for no reason. And I forgot the video intro to the message. So if you want to go ahead and play the video intro, because otherwise what I say here won't make sense.
Hello, Fam Church. My name is Mark Shue, as you all know, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about endurance. When I think of endurance, the first person I think of is Jesus, enduring on the cross for us. What he went through was just amazing. So that would be my first thought. When I think of endurance, maybe some other cases of the Bible, I think of the children of Israel roaming the desert for 40 years, lasting, hanging in there, and sustaining. In maybe the sports world, I think of a boxer, how much stress and training and just rigorous conditioning they have to go through. They endure through all that. So as far as trying to help you out, one thing that I thought was helpful was to hear the testimonies of others. throughout the years I've listened to many testimonies in church about Christians that have gone through trials in their lives and had to endure hardships, and maybe it was a healing, maybe it was something else, but hearing those testimonies definitely helps build your faith. Uh, but again, the greatest thing you can do is put your uh, put your trust in the Lord, in Jesus Christ. And again, as far as my situation, whenever you go through cancer, it is a long, enduring process. Your body is pretty much put on the brink of death, and then you're brought back. But I believe it was this church family's endurance, my family's endurance, especially my wonderful wife Rosa, that just prayed and brought me through. So to rely on others, don't think that that's a bad thing. So you need others to get through something like that. So firstly, make sure that you're leaning on Christ, okay, and then second, get all the other help you can, especially from your church family and your family. So that's a little bit of what I'd like to share about endurance.
Yeah. See, Mark had cancer attack his body not just once, but more than once. And see, when stuff like that happens, it shakes our faith in God and our endurance gives out. And I think that has partly to do with the culture and the society in which we live. Because we like to think that, oh, we're good people, right? We're good, and so because we're good, bad things don't happen. Well, I'm good because I pay my bills on time. I'm good because I go to work and I do all of those things. And I'm good because I say hi to the Walmart greeter when they say hi to me when I walk in the door. And so we say, you know what? I'm good. At least I've got this definition. I've got this idea. I've got this concept of good. And because I am good according to that definition, then God should only give me what is good, or at least good according to my definition. And so when stuff happens, when something happens that comes at us that we look at and we cannot comprehend it as something being good, we get mad and we get ticked and we walk out on our faith. We don't endure in situations like that. I've lost count of the people that I know that have had something tragic, that have had something terrible happen in their life, and because of that tragedy and because of it not being good, and they felt like they were a good person and they were serving God, they said, you know what? If that's the way it's going to be, then I'm done with God. They determined that the endurance is not worth it. But this writer here is telling us that there are people out there who've endured far harder things, that have been in far more difficult situations and circumstances, that only way that they got relief from their circumstances was through death. And the writer is saying, if they could endure those situations and circumstances, then we can endure too. They did not quit. They went on to claim their prize and stand in the winner's circle. And that should give us, as readers of this letter, the courage to push forward and have the faith to stand and endure to the end so that we can win as well. And I know it's hard for us to wrap our brains around this whole thing because we've been told a story, we've been lied to, we've been told that if we do things God's way, that means our life is going to be blessed. And we've got this idea or concept in our brain of what a blessed life looks like. When we look at a blessed life, we don't look at somebody who's gone around in sheepskins and goat skins, living in holes, living in mountains, living in caves, being sawn in two. We don't go, hey, that's a blessed life. I want that right there. That's not how we think. We think our blessed life, we're going to have a nice house. We're going to have a car that never breaks down or gives us problems. When we have children, they're going to be the best children in the world. They're never going to do anything wrong. They're going to go to the best colleges and get a great career and make lots of money. And we say that's a blessed life. But when we read the Bible, it tells us over and over again that that's not the way it works out for a lot of people. For most people, especially if you are a follower of Christ, the exact opposite happens. And I'm going to get to that reason in a minute, but the reason why that happens in a minute. But when the opposite happens, we need to know that there's a great cloud of people that have gone before us, that have been through what we are going through. So we need to look at them and say, because they made it, we can make it through this. Because some were sawn in two, because some were stoned, because some were put to death by the sword, because some battled cancer, because some lost their homes and their lives were left in financial ruin, and yet they endured through Jesus. I can too. And the second thing that we see here about endurance, and it goes right along with what we were just talking about, and it's also the answer to the question of why we need to expect the struggle in life. We live in a world where there are two kingdoms in conflict. There's a kingdom of darkness, and there's a kingdom of light. The kingdom of darkness kind of rules this planet and rules this universe, and the kingdom of light is outside of it. Now, the kingdom of light ultimately does have control, and yes, if he wanted to, could come in and destroy the kingdom of darkness, but he hasn't, because guess what? It was humanity's choice to have the world that we are living in. We have to come to grips with that, okay? Adam and Eve, unfortunately, chose this world that we are in. They had a choice. They had a choice between living in a world where God was supreme or living in a world where they were supreme, and they chose the world where they were supreme. And unfortunately, that is the mess that we get in that situation. And when we become a follower of Jesus, what happens to us is we are transferred from one kingdom to another. See, before we followed Jesus, we were in the kingdom of darkness, but now suddenly, when we start to follow Jesus, we are moved, and we are now a citizen of the kingdom of light. Well, the kingdom of darkness doesn't like people who are part of the kingdom of light, and it creates conflict. This conflict is similar to the conflict you experience in everyday life, like you think that Zane should have left One Direction and all your friends disagree, so sometimes you end up a conflict over them with it. Or you are in a great conflict of whether or not country music is actually music, and you say yes, so you are in conflict with everyone who has good musical taste. Or maybe it's a conflict between McDonald's and good tasting food. You want to go to McDonald's to eat, but everyone you know that likes their food to taste good doesn't want to go there. These are the type of conflicts that we face every day in life, and I'm just kidding about all of those. You guys are a little bit tense now because some people really like McDonald's, and there's some other people who like country music, and I know I'm like most of you guys didn't get the One Direction comment, did you? I didn't think so. All right, that was for the teenagers. The teenagers all got that one. All right. But in a real conflict, what happens? We got several people at our church who have fought in real conflicts. And in real conflicts, attacks happen. In real conflicts, there are real fights with real casualties and real consequences. And the same thing is true in our life and walk with Jesus. We are a participant in a conflict between the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. And as long as we are part of the kingdom of light, we have to be prepared for the attacks to come, because the kingdom of darkness does not like to lose anyone to the kingdom of light. So when that does happen, those of the darkness are going to come after those of the light. And I've seen it happen over and over again. But for some reason, people expect that when they are with God, that none of that stuff is going to happen to them, affect them, or have an impact on their life. It just doesn't work that way. During the first Gulf War, Desert Storm, I was a student at the University of Minnesota, and the President Bush was kind of ramping things up to go over and to remove the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and he was starting to call up National Guard, starting to call up lots of National Guard because they were going to have to go over and fight. And suddenly, there were National Guard members on the news. Suddenly, there were National Guard members standing on the campus of the university, and they were all saying, "I morally object to war, and they should not send me to war because I morally object." My question always was, what were you thinking then? You joined something called the military. What did you think would happen? I mean, really? Most of them, I think, signed up because they wanted a free college education, and they didn't think that anything was going to happen where they were going to be called up to active duty. But see, that's what happens when you sign up for the military. Guess what? You are signing up for the potential to go and put your life on the line for whatever the president or the Congress deems you need to put your life on the line for. It doesn't matter your opinion. It doesn't matter if you think war is immoral. You shouldn't join the military. That's all I got to say about that. And see, the kingdom of light is the same way. We are in a conflict, and we need to expect a fight. We need to expect attacks from the kingdom of darkness, but we are never going to endure if we don't think those things are going to come or happen to us. We're never going to endure if we think we are the exception to the rule and stuff like that won't happen. And we also have to understand that sometimes things that happen to us just happen to us. It's not about kingdom of light and kingdom of darkness stuff. It just happens because we are alive and we are people. I mean, things like sickness and disease, many times sickness and disease comes not because Satan decided to give it to us, but just because we live in a sinful, fallen world with sinful, fallen bodies that are vulnerable to disease. And it's not going to change until Jesus returns. And because we live in a world, we suffer right along with everyone else in this world. And so until Jesus returns, people are going to get sick. People are going to get diseases. People are going to make bad financial decisions that cost us our job, our cars, and our house. It's part of the deal that we get with living in a sinful, fallen world. So we need to be prepared to endure, because sometimes bad stuff is just going to happen to us. Finally, in this section, this tells us to focus on Jesus. Jesus endured a far more painful, stressful, and difficult situation than many of us ever will. So if we want to make it through this life and have the endurance to win the race and claim our prize, we need to keep our eyes focused on Jesus. You see, too many times we focus on what is coming at us. We focus on the things that are coming at us, that are trying to take us out and trying to take us down. And Jesus says, look, that's not where I want your focus to be. Turn your focus off of the things that are coming at you and turn your focus onto me, because what's going to happen is when you are looking at that enemy coming in against you, it's going to be discouraging. It's going to pull you down. It's going to put you in a place where you're going to say, I'm not going to be able to endure this. But when you fix your eyes and you look at Jesus and you say, Jesus, I'm focused on you, he is going to give us the strength. He is going to give us the power. He is going to give us the faith that we need to stand and endure to the end through whatever it is that we are going through. And we'll be able to stand at the end of the race and claim our prize. Rob, if you could come on back up. In the Boston Marathon, there's a hill called Heartbreak Hill. Heartbreak Hill occurs just past the 20-mile point, and it's the steepest climb on this route, and it's also the steepest climb on any of the major marathon races in the United States. It's called Heartbreak Hill because it's the spot in the race where more people tap out, where more people quit, where more people walk away from the race than at any point. It breaks their heart. It tests the runner's endurance greatly, and only those who are trained, prepared, and ready for it make the push to the finish line. And in our race with Jesus, we are going to encounter many heartbreak hills. There are going to be many things that are going to come against us, and they're going to test us, and they're going to push us, and we're going to be climbing, and we're going to be running, and we're going to be trying to finish the race. And the voice in the back of our head is going to be saying, you know what? It's time to tap out of this thing. It's time to end this. It's time to get out of the race. And when we get to that point, we need to remember what it says here in Hebrews 12, 1 through 3, so that we have what it takes to endure in the race. We have to remember those who've gone before us, those who've gone through things, those who've walked the walk of endurance and had to fight through and make it through to the end. All of the people in Hebrews chapter 11, or maybe there's somebody around you right now that you've seen walk through and endure some very painful and hurtful and hard situations and circumstances, but yet they've endured. To look on them and say, if they did it, I can do it, and endure through that situation. Then we also need to remember that we've got to fight. Struggles are a part of this life. We're not going to avoid them. We're not going to live free from them. We are in a conflict. We're in a war. And because we are part of a battle, stuff is going to happen. Just living life is going to cause stuff to happen. But don't let it shake you. Don't let it push you out of the race and keep you from winning the prize. And then finally, keep your eyes and your heart focused on Jesus. Because he endured the cross. He endured the pain and suffering. He's gone through stuff just like we have, and yet he was able to endure it. So if we can keep our eyes on him, he's going to help us to endure to the end of the race. And see, like I said last week, if we get that in our hearts, if we get that in our minds that we are going to be a church that not only prepares to win, that not only is disciplined to win, but we can endure to make it to the winner's circle, it's going to make this church a different church. It's going to make this church a church that's going to win in the long run and win big. But you're going to win too if you can get this endurance in your heart. You're going to be able to win the race as well in your own personal life. And so this morning, to close, I just want to take a moment to pray. I want to pray for those who are going through things and you're saying to yourself, I don't think I can endure this. And you're ready to tap out. I want to pray for you. I want to pray for those who maybe aren't in this spot right now. Things are okay. You're not being pushed too hard. But I want to pray for you that when that time comes, that God is going to help you stand strong and make it through and endure to make it to the winner's circle.
I really hope you enjoyed that message from our series Winning Team. If you did, please click the like button below to let us know. And if you have any questions about us here at Fam Church, go out to myfamchurch.com. And thank you once again for joining us online at Fam Church.